Ethan Lancaster wakes up in a hospital with no memory of the last 5 years. His empire is gone, his fortune wiped out, and a cryptic note warns, you have 72 hours before they finish the job. But who are they? And why did they erase his past? The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor was the first thing Ethan Lancaster became aware of. His eyelids felt heavy, like they were weighed down by lead, but he forced them open. The blinding white of fluorescent hospital lights made him wince. A dull, throbbing pain radiated from the back of his head, and his entire body felt stiff, as if he had been lying in the same position for days, maybe weeks. He turned his head slightly, his vision adjusting to the sterile surroundings. The smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils. A nurse, noticing his movement, gasped and quickly exited the room, likely to inform a doctor. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice nothing more than a hoarse rasp. Moments later, a doctor entered, his expression shifting between relief and concern. "Mr. Lancaster," he said gently, "you've been unconscious for almost 3 weeks. You suffered a severe head injury. Do you remember what happened?" Ethan frowned, trying to grasp onto something, anything, that would explain why he was here, but his mind was a foggy void, fragmented images swirling without context. He swallowed hard. I don't know," he admitted. His voice was weaker than he expected. "How did I get here?" The doctor hesitated before answering. "You were found unconscious in your penthouse. There was a head wound consistent with a fall, but the circumstances surrounding it are unclear." A fall? That didn't sound right. Ethan Lancaster wasn't the type of man who simply fell. He was a billionaire, a self-made titan of industry, a man who had built Lancaster Holdings from the ground up. He had been at the top of the world, and yet, as he sat there, vulnerable in a hospital bed, something gnawed at his subconscious. "What day is it?" he asked. The doctor glanced at his chart. April 17th, 2028. Ethan's stomach twisted. The last date he could remember was from 5 years ago. The doctor noticed his reaction and exchanged a cautious glance with the nurse. "What's the last thing you remember?" Ethan closed his eyes, trying to conjure the memory, but it was like staring into static. There were flashes, his office, a business deal, a woman's voice whispering something urgent, but nothing solid. "It's 2023, he muttered. The doctor exhaled. "Mr. Lancaster, I'm afraid you're experiencing retrograde amnesia. Memory loss from head trauma isn't uncommon, but yours is extensive." Ethan clenched his jaw. 5 years of his life were gone. Before he could fully process the shock, a nurse entered, holding a small envelope. "This was left for Mr. Lancaster shortly after he was admitted," she said, placing it on his bedside table. The doctor gave a nod and stepped back. "I'll give you a moment." Ethan reached for the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. There was no name, no return address, just a single line written on the front in ink. "They took everything. You have 72 hours before they finish the job." His pulse quickened. Who was they? What had they taken? As he sat there, staring at the ominous note, one thing became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just memory loss. Someone had erased his past, and they weren't done with him yet. Ethan Lancaster stared at the cryptic message in his trembling hands. The words echoed in his mind like a ticking clock. "They took everything. You have 72 hours before they finish the job." Who had written it? What did they mean by "finish the job"? His pulse quickened as the gravity of the situation sank in. Someone had done this to him, deliberately erased 5 years of his life, and now they were planning to eliminate him altogether. He needed answers. Ignoring the doctor's protests, Ethan pulled the IV needle from his arm and swung his legs over the edge of the hospital bed. A wave of dizziness nearly sent him collapsing, but he gritted his teeth and steadied himself. He couldn't afford weakness right now. "Mr. Lancaster, you need to rest," the doctor insisted. "Rest?" Ethan snapped, his voice hoarse but firm. "I just woke up to find out my life has been stolen. I don't have time to rest." The doctor sighed. "At least, let me arrange for someone to escort you." But Ethan was already moving. He found a hospital gown and coat in the closet, dressed himself as best as he could, and walked out of the room. His head pounded with every step, but sheer willpower pushed him forward. When he reached the front desk, he demanded his personal belongings. The receptionist hesitated before handing him a single plastic bag containing his watch, phone, and wallet. His heart sank when he opened it. His bank cards were missing, his hands clenched into fists. Who the hell had done this? The hollow empire Ethan's first stop was Lancaster Holdings, his billion-dollar company, or what was left of it. The moment he stepped out of the cab in front of the towering skyscraper, something felt off. His company's name was still on the building, but the atmosphere was different, colder, unfamiliar. As he entered the lobby, the receptionist, a young woman who should have recognized him instantly, simply stared at him blankly. "Can I help you, sir?" Ethan frowned. "It's me, Ethan Lancaster." The woman hesitated before responding. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lancaster, but you don't have clearance to enter." His blood ran cold. "What the hell are you talking about? This is my company." She swallowed, clearly nervous. "Your executive status was revoked 6 months ago." Shock hit him like a freight train. He turned toward the large LED stock ticker mounted on the wall. Lancaster Holdings shares had plummeted by 80%. "What happened?" he demanded. I think you should speak to Mr. Wolf." That name sent a jolt of rage through him. Damian Wolf, his longtime business rival, the man who had spent years trying to buy him out. Without another word, Ethan stormed past security, ignoring their shouts. He took the elevator to the executive floor, his mind racing. If Wolf was in control, then this was a hostile takeover. But how? Ethan would never have sold his empire, not willingly. As he reached the top floor, the doors slid open to reveal Damian Wolf himself, seated behind the massive mahogany desk that had once belonged to Ethan. He looked up with an infuriatingly calm smile. "Ethan," Wolf said smoothly, "I was wondering when you'd finally crawl back." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "What the hell have you done to my company?" Wolf leaned back in the chair that should have been his. "I didn't do anything. You did." Ethan's breath caught. "That's impossible." Wolf slid a file across the desk. Ethan picked it up, his eyes scanning the pages. It was a contract, his own signature at the bottom, selling controlling interest of Lancaster Holdings to Wolf for pennies on the dollar. His head swam. He had no memory of signing this. "That's not possible," Ethan growled. "I'd never sign this." "And yet you did," Wolf smirked. "Funny thing is, you were very eager." Ethan's fingers clenched the document so tightly that the paper crumpled. Something was very, very wrong. He wasn't just missing memories. Someone had made sure he destroyed his own life, and he had no idea why. A face from the past. As Ethan stormed out of the office, his mind reeled. He needed to find someone, anyone who could fill in the gaps. And then he saw her, a woman in the hallway staring at him in shock. Long, dark hair, eyes filled with something between guilt and fear. Sophia Blake, the last woman he remembered trusting, his fiancée. His heart pounded. "Sophia!" Her face paled. Then she turned and ran. Ethan didn't hesitate. The moment Sophia Blake turned to run, he bolted after her. His body was still weak from the hospital stay, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He shoved past stunned employees, ignoring their protests as he chased her down the executive hallway. "Sophia! Stop!" he shouted. She didn't. She reached a stairwell and sprinted downward, her heels clicking against the metal steps. Ethan followed, heart pounding, memories, or what little remained of them, flashing like static in his mind. Sophia had been his fiancée, hadn't she? He remembered holding her hand, laughing with her, but that was 5 years ago. And now, she was running from him. He caught up with her in the underground parking lot, grabbing her wrist before she could escape. "Sophia," he panted, tightening his grip. "I need answers. What the hell happened to me?" She yanked away, eyes wild with fear. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan. You need to leave. Now." His gut twisted. "Why? What do you know?" Sophia shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't understand. If they know I talked to you, I'll—" "Who?" Ethan cut in. "Who did this to me?" She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a black SUV screeched into the garage. The windows were tinted, but Ethan didn't need to see the driver to know this wasn't a coincidence. Sophia's eyes widened. They found you. The SUV doors flew open. Two men in suits stepped out, guns drawn. Instinct took over. Ethan grabbed Sophia's hand and yanked her behind a concrete pillar just as bullets whizzed past them, sparking against the garage floor. Sophia screamed. Ethan scanned for an exit. No weapon, no plan, and nowhere to run. Then, a third man stepped out of the SUV, an older, rough-looking figure in a leather jacket. He wasn't holding a gun. Instead, he was holding a phone. With a smirk, he lifted it up and turned the screen toward Ethan. It was a live video feed. Ethan's blood ran cold. The footage was of his penthouse, his home. A masked figure was inside, rifling through his belongings, searching for something. The man in the leather jacket finally spoke. "You have something we need, Mr. Lancaster, and if you don't find it soon..." He tapped the screen, switching to another feed. A sniper aiming at Ethan's home. "We'll burn down whatever's left of your life." The call ended. The SUV peeled out of the garage before Ethan could react. He turned to Sophia, breathless. "What the hell was that?" Her voice was shaky. "The people who erased your past are still watching you." Ethan Lancaster had been blindsided before, but never like this. Standing in the dimly lit underground garage, still shaken from the gunfire and the chilling message, he turned to Sophia Blake, his former fiancée, the woman he once trusted more than anyone. "The people who erased my past are still watching me," he repeated, voice sharp with frustration. "You need to start explaining, now." Sophia hesitated, eyes darting toward the stairwell, as if she was debating whether to run again. Ethan saw the conflict in her expression. Fear and guilt twisted together. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't know they'd come so soon. You have to believe me, Ethan. I wanted to warn you, but I didn't know how. They control everything." Ethan clenched his fists. "Who are they?" Sophia swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "It's not just one person. It's a network. Your enemies, your rivals, people you never even suspected. They planned this for years, Ethan. They didn't just take your company, they took your mind." His stomach turned. "Explain?" Sophia took a shaky breath. "It started with Oliver." At the sound of that name, Ethan felt rage boil in his veins. Oliver Grant, his most trusted aide, his right-hand man, the person who had been by his side since the early days of Lancaster Holdings. "Oliver did this?" Ethan asked, barely believing the words. Sophia nodded. "He was the one who orchestrated everything. The deals that bankrupted your company, the forged documents, the offshore accounts. But the worst part? He was inside your head the whole time." Ethan's vision blurred with anger. "What the hell do you mean?" Sophia took a step closer. "They didn't just trick you into signing things, Ethan. They drugged you. They manipulated your mind, slowly altering your perception, breaking down your judgment, making you believe that every bad decision you made was your own." Ethan's breath hitched. It explained everything, the gaps in his memory, the strange contracts, the deals he couldn't recall making. They hadn't just stolen his company, they had turned him into his own worst enemy. "And the accident?" he pressed. Sophia looked away. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" Ethan's voice was dark, dangerous. She shook her head. "Number you were getting too close to the truth. Oliver and Wolf decided you needed to be eliminated. They staged the accident, planning to finish the job while you were unconscious." A sick realization settled in Ethan's gut. "But I survived." Sophia met his gaze. "And now they're scared. They don't know what you remember, what you might uncover. That's why they sent that message." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "Why are you telling me this? You were part of it, weren't you?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I was, at first. They recruited me to keep you distracted. But I never expected to fall in love with you." Her voice cracked. "I tried to warn you, but Oliver found out. He made me disappear before I could help you." Ethan exhaled sharply, fighting the wave of betrayal washing over him. He had loved this woman, trusted her, and now, after 5 lost years, she was telling him she had been part of his downfall. "I don't know if I can believe you," he admitted coldly. Sophia reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "Then believe this." Ethan hesitated before taking it. "What's on here?" Everything, she whispered. Proof of what they did to you. The offshore accounts, the forged contracts, the medical records of the drugs they used to control you. Ethan's heart pounded. This was it. The smoking gun. But before he could react, the elevator dinged behind them. Footsteps echoed in the parking garage. Sophia's eyes widened. They're here! Ethan pocketed the flash drive. No more running. It was time to end this. The sound of footsteps echoed through the underground parking garage, steady and deliberate. Ethan Lancaster clenched his jaw, his body tensing as he positioned himself between Sophia and the approaching danger. He didn't have a weapon, but at this point, rage was fuel enough. A familiar voice sliced through the silence. Well, look who finally decided to start asking questions. Oliver Grant. Ethan turned as his former right-hand man stepped into the dim light. Oliver was dressed immaculately as always, a tailored suit, an easy smirk, and the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. Oliver, Ethan said, his voice laced with fury. I should have known you'd be the one pulling the strings. Oliver let out a short, amused chuckle. Pulling the strings? Come on, Ethan, I built you. And when I realized you weren't worthy of what you had, I took it back. Ethan's fists clenched. You didn't take it. You drugged me. You manipulated me. You stole 5 years of my life. Oliver's smirk didn't waver. Oh, don't be so dramatic. We simply nudged you in the right direction. You still signed everything yourself, after all. He took a slow step forward. The drugs were just insurance. We needed you compliant, confused. We needed you to self-destruct. Ethan's stomach churned. They had turned him into his own downfall, and it had worked, but not anymore. Ethan pulled the flash drive Sophia had given him from his pocket and held it up. All your secrets, Oliver, the accounts, the manipulation, the drugs, it's over. Oliver sighed as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. You really think that's enough? This isn't a movie, Ethan. You can't just expose me and expect justice. He snapped his fingers. 2 armed men stepped out from the shadows, guns raised. Sophia gasped, gripping Ethan's arm. He could feel her trembling, but he didn't take his eyes off Oliver. You see, Oliver continued smoothly, I made a mistake before. I left you alive, but I don't make the same mistake twice. Ethan felt the cold edge of reality settling in. He wasn't going to talk his way out of this. He needed to act. The trap closes. Oliver lifted a hand, preparing to give the order, and then gunfire, not aimed at Ethan, at Oliver's men. Bullets whizzed through the garage, striking Oliver's enforcers before they could react. They collapsed instantly. From the shadows, Jonah Hayes, the private investigator who had helped Ethan uncover the truth, stepped forward, pistol still smoking. Oliver stumbled backward, eyes widening. What the? Ethan advanced on him, seizing Oliver by the collar and slamming him against the nearest concrete pillar. You stole my life, Ethan growled. Now I'm taking it back. Oliver struggled, but Ethan tightened his grip. He could see the fear creeping into the man's usually smug expression. For the first time, Oliver realized he wasn't in control anymore. You think this changes anything? Oliver spat. You think people like me ever lose? Ethan leaned in. Oh, you lost the moment you let me live. He pulled out his phone, turning the screen toward Oliver. The flash drive's contents, all of Oliver's crimes, the financial fraud, the medical experiments, the paper trail that tied him to Damien Wolf's conspiracy, had already been uploaded to every major media outlet in the country. Oliver's face paled. I always had a backup plan, Ethan said coldly. The sound of sirens filled the air as flashing red and blue lights flooded the parking garage. FBI agents stormed in, their weapons drawn. Oliver tried to run. Ethan grabbed him by the arm and threw him forward, straight into the waiting arms of the federal agents. An agent snapped handcuffs onto Oliver's wrists, reciting his rights. His struggles were futile. The great Oliver Grant, the mastermind behind everything, was dragged away like a common criminal. Sophia let out a shaky breath beside Ethan. It's over! But Ethan wasn't smiling, not yet. The final play. Not quite, he muttered. There was still one loose end. Damien Wolf. 2 days later, Damien sat in the comfort of his luxury penthouse, sipping a glass of aged scotch, confident he had escaped the fallout of Oliver's arrest. His phone rang. He answered with a smirk. "If you're calling to beg, Lancaster, check the news." Damien frowned, grabbing his remote. The headline was plastered across every channel. Lancaster Holdings CEO exonerated. Billion-dollar fraud exposed. Damien Wolf implicated in corporate conspiracy. His blood turned to ice. "You son of a..." "You should have killed me when you had the chance," Ethan said, voice deadly calm. "But now, I'm making sure you go down with the rest of them." Damien slammed his glass down. "You can't touch me." Ethan laughed. "You're right, but the SEC can. The IRS can. And I made sure they got all the evidence they need." Damien's jaw clenched as agents appeared outside his penthouse with a warrant. "Goodbye, Wolf." The call disconnected. Ethan exhaled, watching as his enemies finally crumbled. A new beginning. Days later, standing atop his reclaimed office in Lancaster Holdings, Ethan looked out at the city. His city. He had won, but he had also learned something. Power wasn't in wealth. It wasn't in control. It was in knowing who you are, and no one would ever take that from him again. He turned to Jonah and Sophia, both standing beside him. "So," Jonah said, "what's next?" Ethan smirked. "We rebuild my way." And this time, no one would erase him.